The speaker of today is Luiz Hespanhol. He's associate professor at the University of Sao Paulo. And I'm really happy that he had a pit stop here, at least for a couple of hours in Bern, because he's moving to the next conference, which will be a conference about gathering the best researchers in the field to come up with some joint projects and guidelines with regards to running-related injuries. So thank you for coming, Luiz. And Luiz wrote also a book about running for health. And he will tell us this afternoon probably whether running is really healthy or as healthy as we think, or there might be also some risk associated to health. Thank you for coming, Luiz.
Thank you very much. So, hi everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Luiz Hespanhol. I am a professor in UNICID. UNICID is the acronym for the University of the City of São Paulo in a free translation. I'm a physiotherapist. This is my background. And before I start, I'd like to say thank you for the Bern University of Applied Sciences for the invitation. I also would like to acknowledge FAPESP, which is the São Paulo Research Foundation. And FAPESP has funded my trip to Europe. So thank you for this. And today we are going to talk about developing and implementing running-related injury prevention programs. And I'm trying to put this topic into two different contexts, one in the Netherlands and one context in Brazil. And I'm going to guide you through a background about running actually. Then we are going to talk about running-related injuries and the prevention of running-related injuries. Then I'm going to show you what we have done in the Netherlands, and this is a project called Trail 6. Then I'm going to describe to you the project that our group are running right now, which is called Running 3. And in the end, we have some take-home messages. So to start to talk about running, I like to show this graph. And what this graph says, let me guide you through this. So we have the horizontal line, which is the exposure of physical activity in minutes per day. And then we have the vertical axis, which means all-cause mortality reduction, and it's in percentage. Then we have two exponential or quadratic lines here, one for running and one for walking. And what I want to call your attention for first is for this first square here. And what this graph is telling us here is that if you walk 15 minutes per day, you have around 20% reduction on all-cause mortality. But when it comes to running, you have the same effect if you run only 5 minutes a day. If you see the bigger square over here, we can see that 105 minutes of walking leads to approximately 35% of reduction in mortality. But if you compare with running, the same effect we can get with only 25 minutes per day. So what this picture shows, well, it's not big news that exercise is healthy. Physical activity is healthy. And walking is one of the most popular ways of getting physically active. As running is also one of the most popular types of physical activity. But if you run, comparing to walk, you can reach the health benefits earlier than comparing to walking. So with this graph, we can actually say that it seems that running is healthy. But then during my PhD, I was interested not in mortality, but actually in seeing if running could lead to improvements into what we called in this paper indices of health. In Brazil, we called health indicators. It's the same idea of if you run, if you can improve some markers in your body and say that if you are healthy, you are healthier or not. And what we have shown is that if you have a training schedule or running exposure for 1 year, after 1 year, a runner has a probability of decreasing your body mass by 3.3 kilograms. It can decrease your body fat or percentage of body fat by a rate of 2.7%. it can decrease your resting heart rate for a rate of 6.7 BPM, and you can decrease your serum triglycerides by 16.9 milligrams per deciliter. In the same way, so again, running for 1 year, having a training schedule and running for 1 year can increase your VO2 max by 7.1 milligrams per minute per kilogram, and can increase your serum HDL concentration by 3.3 milligrams per deciliter. And what this picture shows us is that all these changes says the same message. Running is actually healthy. Running changes some index of health towards a healthier outcome. Well, the problem is that running is a physical activity as other sports as well, and you can face it, you can interpret it as an intervention, for example, for increased physical activity. And as other interventions, as you may know, it can be some side effects. And with running is not different. So if you run, the problem is that there is a risk attached to it, and probably the most important risk is the risk of getting injured, musculoskeletal injuries. And we see in São Paulo, for example, that the incidence of running-related injuries is about 10 running-related injuries per 1,000 hours of running exposure. The problem with run-related injuries is actually that they are preventable outcomes. So this means that, okay, maybe I don't think that 10 run-related injuries per 1,000 hours of exposure would be a very great, big risk, but it's preventable. So if it is preventable, we should do something about it, right? And in 2011, a Cochrane review was published about the topic. So the title is Interventions for Preventing Lower Limb Soft Tissue Running Injuries. The idea is to see the picture until 2011 of interventions that could prevent running injuries. And they included in this systematic review 25 randomized control trials with a pooled population of more than 30,000 people. And the problem, the first characteristic that we need to take into account is that most of this study was military studies. But we have some 3 studies actually from the general population, which actually is the runners that we are more interested in. 2 studies with prisoners, and 1 with soccer referees. So this is what we got until 2011. And the bad news first. So what this systematic review showed as no preventive effect. Well, stretching, conditioning exercises. So for example, I want to start running, but then before I start my training, my running training schedule, I do, for example, some walking and jumping exercises for some time. And after this time, I start my running training. So this seems not to be effective for preventing running-related injuries. Gradual training, so the famous 10% rule. So this means that each week you should not increase more than 10% of, for example, your running volume. This seems not to work for preventing running-related injuries as well. Using special footwears or special socks doesn't seem to prevent injuries as well. And the reduction of running distance, substituting this running distance by walking, that means decreasing the running exposure for substituting this exposure by walking exposure seems not to prevent injuries as well. But let's see the good news. The good news until 2011 is that we had some ideas of what could prevent running-related injuries. So let me describe this table for you. So in the first line here, we have decreasing running duration seems to have a preventive effect. Problem is, the risk of bias of this study was very high and was only 1 study in prisoners, and a very small study. If you go to the next row, decreasing running frequency seems to have a preventive effect, but again, a high risk of bias, a small study, and also with prisoners. And we should say that these 2 first rows were about overall running-related injuries, so not specific preventive programs. When you go to the third one, so specifically for patellofemoral, for anterior knee pain, Patellofemoral brace seems to have a preventive effect, but it's only 2 studies, one in military population and one in general runners, with high risk of bias. The next one is shock-absorbing heel certs, only 1 study with soccer referees, and seems to prevent delayed onset muscle soreness. And the last one is custom-made insole, only 1 study with military population, high risk of bias, and it seems to have a preventive effect on medial tibial stress syndrome that you may know as chin splint. So I described the table for you, and if you followed me this here, you could, maybe you are thinking about what I'm thinking when I see this table. So all studies have a high risk of bias. They are usually small studies, and there are actually few studies included in each of these analyses. So the systematic review concluded that all of this has limited evidence, and I would say very limited evidence facing these numbers. And another thing is, if you take the overall injuries, which is actually what I am more interested in, and why is that? Because, for example, if you have an intervention like custom-made insole that can prevent shin splints, may increase your risk of other injuries. So at this time point, I'm more interested in preventing overall injuries than specific ones. And if we see the interventions that actually have been shown to have some effect, some preventive effect, if we assume that we can rely on this data, the interventions are actually say, if you don't run, you don't get injured. I mean, if you decrease your running duration and decrease your frequency, you are not get injured. And it's very, yeah, we understand that very well. But the problem is, in practice, if you are a runner, so I'm going to ask you a question. How many of you are runners? Please raise your hand. Okay. So if you are a runner, and I tell you that for preventing running-related injuries, you should run less, would you take it? Would you implement it in your practice? No. Yeah, that's the point. So even if you have a preventive effect there, it's probably not implementable. So during my PhD, what I thought, based on this evidence, I thought that, well, I think we should do differently what have been done so far. And usually these studies pick one intervention and try to see if it is effective or not. It's not much different. My background is in physiotherapy, and in physiotherapy is not much different what happens there. So for example, someone starts to think about a theoretical framework or something, says that he or she has a new intervention, puts a name of it, sometimes her or his name on it, and sells this intervention as something that works or not. And the research goes there, take this intervention and test to see if it's effective or not in science. But what if we develop one intervention from the start using scientific or evidence-based methods? Not only what I think it works, but what a group of people or what science is telling me that could have a higher probability of working in practice. And then I started to study this kind of methods, and at first I came up with 2 models. So what you see in this slide is a big square, and the big square is what we call sequence of prevention, of sports injury prevention actually. That was developed by Willem van Mechelen in 1992. And in the step 1, you should understand the problem, the extent of the problem. In the step 2, the etiology or the mechanisms that develop this problem. Then in the step 3, you should introduce preventive measures, but before implementing, you should evaluate if this is effective or not. During my PhD in 2014, it was published another framework, and the idea of this new framework was helping developing and implementing interventions. And this framework is called Knowledge Transfer Scheme, which is the circle that you see in the slide. And this has 5 steps: problem statement, evidence description, knowledge transfer group, product development, and evaluation. And what I thought is, what if we interact these 2 models, trying to guide the development of a new intervention. And it seems like a good idea. So I tried to do it. And to address the step 1 of Van Mechlen's sequence of prevention, and also the first step of the knowledge transfer scheme, we actually conducted one cohort study with trail runners to understand the incidence, the prevalence, and severity of running-related injuries in this specific population. In the second step, we put together the evidence of this study with the evidence from the literature, trying to get more evidence on the extent of the problem, but also to start addressing the step 2. The step 2 is understanding the etiology of running-related injuries. And then we put together a knowledge transfer group, which was a group composed of health professionals, trainers, runners itself, and researchers, to take this knowledge, discuss, and come up with some elements that an intervention should have. And the idea was that if this group, with runners and researchers and health professionals, all talking about the same topic, we could come out with something that has a higher probability of being effective in practice. And then we started to produce the intervention. And what was built was the Trail 6. What we called Trail 6 is a preventive strategy for running-related injuries. And this was the step 4, which was evaluate the Trail 6. So now what I'm going to describe to you is the effectiveness of this program, which was based on the theory of planned behavior. So the idea here is that the programs is about changing intention, which is, in turn, can influence behavior, preventive behavior in this case. And we try to do that influencing the distal determinants of behavior, which is attitude, subjective, norm, and perceived behavior control. The study, so as I said, used the knowledge transfer scheme as a theoretical framework for developing the intervention. The target population was Dutch trail runners. It was a 6-month randomized control trial, which the objective was to evaluate the effectiveness of adding tailored online advice to general advice on the determinants and actual preventive behavior, and what was I was most interested in the prevention of running-related injuries. So we had this 2-arm trial, where in the intervention group, they received in the beginning a general advice, but then during the follow-up, they received this intervention called Trail 6, which was based on tailored advice given every 2 weeks based on their risk of running-related injury profile that we got every 2 weeks using questionnaires. And the control group received in the beginning of the study also general advice, but then during the follow-up, they don't receive any advice anymore or any other intervention. And this flow chart, I know that's a busy one, but I don't want you to read all the information here. It's just you to know that we had 2 arms, and the difference between the 2 arms is actually the Trail 6 intervention, which was composed of 3 blocks of stratification on running-related injury risk. And then we give, if the runner has, for example, a higher probability of getting injured, then we give them specifically advice for that profile. And this was the scheme that we created to deliver the advice, because I didn't have much time at the end of my PhD to run this study with a lot of people, and actually I didn't have funding as well to hire people to work in this trial. So I created an automated tailored advice system, so they could fill in the questionnaire. They were stratified using the system, and then automatically after their response, they received the tailored advice. And this was based on running-related injury risk. So if there is a probability of no injury, they receive general advice. If they had a probability of getting injured, but this is a probability of non-substantial running-related injury or a minor injury, as you may say, they receive a specific type of advice. And if this probability was for substantial or major running-related injuries, they receive also a tailored or specific advice for that stratum. And these are the results. So actually, in the horizontal axis, you have time. So this time is given in weeks. It is based on 2 by 2 weeks because the follow-up we did bi-weekly. And in the vertical axis, you have the probability of getting injured, represented here as percentage. And these 2 lines, the red line represents the development over time of this probability of getting running-related injuries in the intervention group, while in the control group is represented by the blue line. And these are the crude, the raw data. What we did was to model this data in a mixed model, and with this, what this mixed model give us as an outcome. So after 2 months of follow-up, the intervention group decreased their risk of getting injured by 4%. In the control group, it was 1% reduction that we have found, so the difference between them was 3%. And this was statistically significant. However, 3% of risk reduction, we interpret this as a non-relevant effect. It was statistically significant, but the effect was very small. But after 6 months of follow-up, the intervention group decreased 16% the risk of getting injured, while the control group decreased 3%. And the difference here was 13% then. And here we had a statistically significant result, but we interpret this as a relevant for clinical practice. When it comes to the adherence data, most of them adhere to the advice. So we asked them if they followed the specific or the general advice they have received. And most of them said, yes, I followed. But you can see that in the general, so the first line here, following at least one advice, those who had was classified as having a higher risk of getting substantial running-related injuries, they were more adhered to the intervention. They have more adherence to the intervention. And this can be explained by, for example, the reduction of running exposure. So let's imagine that you are classified as having a higher risk of getting a substantial running-related injury. You are more likely to reduce your running volume, for example, because you can be afraid of actually getting injured, and etc. And medical attention, you can see that if you have no probability of getting injured, you don't have a reason at all to seek a medical doctor, for example, for it. But we can see that if you have a higher probability of getting a substantial running-related injury, you are more likely to get a medical attention compared with a risk of getting non-substantial running-related injuries. And this is very straightforward. Then my PhD finished in the Netherlands, and I came back to, came back because I'm living now in Brazil, so then I started to do research there. And in Brazil, I thought that I could do something for the Brazilian population as well, but I decided to use a different framework. Instead of using the knowledge transfer scheme, I used a more detailed, a more descriptive strategy to develop one intervention there. And this intervention mapping approach has 6 steps. The first step is creating a logic model of the problem or a needs assessment. The second is using this logic model of change to actually determine the outcomes and the objectives of a preventive program. Step 3 is the program design itself, which in the theory of the intervention mapping says that should be based on theory of behavior change. The step 4 was the program production itself. Step 5, to think about and to develop an implementation plan. The 6th step, the evaluation plan itself in a study, for example, a randomized control trial. Then you implement the intervention was developed following this 6th step. You evaluate, and if you need to, with this evaluation shows that you need to revisit all these steps and change something to improve the program, you can do it, and you can revisit any step to make changes to improve the program if you want. But just remember that if you change one step, you should evaluate again the effectiveness of the program. So now I'm going to guide you through these steps inside the Running 3 project. How we did this? We used a mixed method study following a participatory approach. A participatory approach is when we, for example, invite the target population to discuss with you what you should do to, for example, prevent running injuries. This means that this group should have runners in it. And this is what we did. We created a group with one sports physician, 2 physiotherapists, 2 exercise and sports sciences practitioners, running coaches actually, 2 researchers, 2 runners, and 1 stakeholder. With this group, we had a strategy of focus groups, so we get them together in 3 face-to-face meetings, and these meetings had a moderator, and this moderator had a prior semi-structured guide to guide these focus group meetings, and the data analysis was conducted with qualitative and quantitative methods, and this is why we call this study a mixed method 1. What we did in the step 1 then of the intervention mapping, which is the logic model of the problem. We established that the health problem is running-related injuries. There was no novelty on this. And the target population at risk in Brazil was not trail runners, but actually recreational runners. It was a more broad intervention. So from start, we knew that the intervention should be a little bit different, at least, from the one that I have developed in the Netherlands. And behaviors of the target population at risk was those. So, for example, not listening to the body was something that we should address for these runners. Another one, for example, not following the training schedule, and, for example, not performing conditioning exercises. So actually, we get all this information during these face-to-face meetings to see what we need to address during the program production. Then we classified these topics in personal determinants for adopting the running-related injury risk behaviors. So, for example, lack of knowledge could be a determinant influencing the runners to implement or not some specific strategy. And low self-efficacy, for example, if a runner actually don't believe that can have control or can really adopt some intervention, it's less likely that the runner will actually implement this strategy. This is just the part of the table that we have created, the part of the logical model of change that I put here in this slide just to give you an example of how this works. So we interact the personal determinants of behavior and the performance objectives, which is the outcome we are looking for during the program. And we created, and when we plot this together, we develop what we call change objectives. So, for example, if you have the performance objective of to demonstrate self-control to follow a training schedule, this would be related to self-efficacy, and the change objective, what we need to change to increase the probability that the runner implement preventive behavior strategies, is actually to develop self-control in keeping the training schedule. Step 2, we develop the objectives of the program, and we had 2 general objectives. The first one was to provide feedback on individual training characteristics and run-related injuries. And the second one was to provide or enhance knowledge, self-efficacy, and skills towards run-related injury prevention. And this second one was actually divided in more specific objectives, to provide knowledge, to facilitate self-efficacy, and to enhance skills in some aspects of the training. Of the running training, sorry. And the primary outcome was the risk of running-related injuries. So what the program is about is in decreasing this risk of running-related injuries. And there are several ways of defining running-related injuries, and what we are trying to do in this study is actually use 2 definitions. One, which is the standard definition of running-related injuries suggested by Yamato in 2015 in a Delphi study. And the other one is the first one that is described here actually is the one that I have used in my studies, for example, in the Netherlands. That's a more broad definition of any problem or any symptom that the running relates to injury, to running itself. And then a health professional evaluate this scenario and see if it's really running-related injury and classified as such. And secondary outcomes of the program would be run-related injury preventive behaviors to see if actually we could change behavior in their running training. Costs, direct or indirect costs related to the implementation of the program, and the incremental cost effectiveness ratio, which is actually a cost effectiveness analysis. The step 2 is to talk about the program design, and we have used a theory as the intervention mapping asks us to do, and we have started with the theory of planned behavior, but then we came up with the idea of including knowledge and skills, which actually becomes the integrated behavior model, or part of the integrated behavior model. So this is the model that are behind the rationale of our intervention. Step 4 is the program production. So we started to develop a website, a platform to gather data, classify runners, and give the materials that we were creating. And the materials were most basically on text. So we send them every 2 weeks some text about a topic. But we send also them videos, instructive videos, for them to watch and see if they can learn something about it or implement something that the video presents in practice. And also we give them some feedback on their workload and run-related injury risk with this platform. This is the scheme that you have created for delivering them the workloads feedback. And the most important part here is the middle part, where actually what we are doing here is asking them if they want to receive some feedback about their running training. Because some of the runners said during the face-to-face meetings, some of the runners said that if a runner had a trainer, a coach, it could be that he or she doesn't want to receive another advice on this topic. Actually, he or she wants to discuss with the coach how to change or keep going with the training schedule. So we ask them actually if they want to receive or not, and if they want to receive, we give them suggestion about the load of running and also run-related injury risk. So the material looks like this. So this is like an infograph with some text on it and some graphs explaining them. So it's in Portuguese because the program was developed in the language of the target population, which is the São Paulo population. I just put this infograph here just to give an example of how one of the strategies was created. And this, for example, is a written material, a more technical one, explaining why we are advising them to do something, for example. And this comes with or attached with a video explaining that. And in the text material, you can see that in the end, we also attach some references on it, so the runner can really have the feeling that this is not just something that we thought without careful consideration. It's actually also evidence-based. And one point that's also important to say is that they don't need actually to see or to read all strategies. We do a lot of strategies and trying to adapt them, adapt the context for the context of the runner. So I could receive all of these materials, but for example, I just have time or I'm just interested in seeing the video. Okay, that's fine, you can do it, and we are trying to measure this as well during the trial. The step 5 is creating a program implementation plan. And what we have done is that we have settled that the delivery of the problem would be online, because we are trying to reach a lot of people, so online would be easier. I know that a lot of people is watching online, for example. So if you think about Brazil, Brazil is big. We have a big area there. And even if you're talking about the state of São Paulo, it's big. So just you to have an idea, the state of São Paulo is almost the size of the Netherlands. So we thought about the delivery of the program being online, trying to reach as much runners as we could. The team, so we had at least 3 collaborators involved in any step of the trial. So this trial would have 1.5 years of duration. So in each phase of the trial, you need at least 3 collaborators involved on it to control the website, control the reminders, and etc. The recruitment, reach, and adoption strategies would be done by social media, stakeholders, and running clubs. So we are contacting them to help in the reach and adoption. And the adherence strategy would be using videos. So our team is creating videos to interact with the runners. And the system has automated reminders. So if the runner missed some information or some follow-up questionnaire, then the system, after 1 week, would send him or she a reminder. Him or her, sorry. So the step 6 is evaluation plan. So I'm describing the trial already, but we decided to evaluate with a 2-arm randomized control trial. The intervention group is, of course, the running 3 strategy, and the control group would be the feedback on individual training characteristics and run-related injury risk. Why we decided to do that? Because, well, if a runner wants to prevent run-related injuries, he or she does not, for example, do nothing. I mean, they will look for something. And usually, if you are a recreational runner, the first place you go probably is going to be the internet. And the internet, you can find a lot of information about feedback, about individual training characteristics, like how much you should run and etc., and run-related injury risk. So we try to mimic, actually, the general practice of these runners. So what do they generally do, and then we compare this with our intervention. Participants would be recreational runners from São Paulo, Brazil. The number of participants, 530. The follow-up, 1 year. And the data collection is planned, we started in April 2019, and we plan to finish the data collection in July 2020. And so the trial is running, but we also have done an evaluation of the development itself. So we have done a study on the facilitators and barriers of the development process of the intervention. Actually, what you want to know here is that all the process, all the 6 steps that you have followed, if this has some barriers and facilitators, and the idea is that if this works, we could actually say to other researchers or people in practice that it would be better to develop an intervention from the beginning, from the start, instead of only planning something not scientific based, for example, and try to see if helps in practice. And this was a mixed method study as well. 9 out of the 10 participants in the face-to-face meetings during that first phase that I presented to you participated in this study. And it was conducted with semi-structured interviews until the topic was saturated. And we did a qualitative analysis and also a quantitative analysis for with the idea of describing this data. And what we found is that we found some facilitators, and the facilitators were actually more cited than the barriers, but there were less categories described in the facilitators. And the 2 most important ones was group meetings, so they actually enjoyed being together in a group during the meetings and discuss the problems. And the form of contact, they said that, well, you did an individualized form of contact, and I like that because I feel that I'm important, I feel that I'm really part of the group. And this was the 2 main important facilitators. And these are the barriers, and the main barriers that we found was absence of participants. So what happened is that we had 3 face-to-face meetings, but some of people that we invited were missing in, for example, 1 or 2 of these meetings because of traffic or because they could not be there for some personal reason. And some of participants said, well, if someone that has presented some ideas in the first meeting, they are not in the second and the third, we can lose the way of thinking. And this could actually hamper the discussions and the development process. And divagations, and what I mean by divagations, well, they said that sometimes the group started to talk about different topics that were not actually focused on the one that you were proposing or discussing. So this is a matter of moderation. So they said, well, the moderator that is controlling the meeting should control more. I mean, should not leave all the participants say what they want, should keep the pace, should keep the focus on the main topic. So finally, the take-home messages of all these things that I have said, I think that the first thing is, adding online advice adjusted every 2 weeks was effective on preventing running-related injuries. And this we have found in the Dutch, in the Dutch study, yeah. However, intervention programs should be adopted to new context. So if I take this model, the Dutch model that we created there, and just implement in Brazil, it's less likely to work there. So developing a new intervention focused on that context probably will increase the probability of getting effectiveness and also to be implemented. And a participatory approach, implementing group meetings and tailored or individualized forms of contact was very nice. So this was the facilitators actually of the development process. And avoiding absence of participants and divagations during discussions seems to be successful in developing or adopting sports injury prevention programs in Brazil. So we could develop the program, but now we are evaluating the program in the trial. I would like to thank very much you guys for your attention. I would like to acknowledge my Dutch supervisors, Willer van Mechelen and Evert Vergagen, that have helped me a lot with the Dutch study. And also, I would like to acknowledge all my research group team that are working very hard to make all these steps of the development process and also the implementation and evaluation plan running. So thank you very much for them. And a special thanks for the Bern University of Applied Sciences for the invitation, and also from FAPESP that, again, has funded my trip to Europe. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, Luiz. Well, we have time for more questions, so I'll try to repeat the questions because people might not hear them.
Sure.
Because we don't have a microphone for running around the room. So please, are there any questions right here? Otherwise, I'll start with one question. Can you maybe show us a bit more or tell us more about the TRAILS? So TRAILS was an acronym, right, for what is included. Maybe you could switch back to the slides so that we get... And my question is, while you repeat what you were doing there, what was the difference then to the intervention here? In the second intervention in Brazil? Is that comparable to TRAILS, or what did you add, or what did you remove? What did you modify?
Okay, so the Trail 6 has this acronym because it's trail runners, and it's 6 because it's based on 6 topics. So if you see, it's small in this slide probably for you that are watching online, but the first one would be trail runners at higher risk. So we give them information of groups of trail runners that could have a higher risk of getting a new injury. So for example, the literature shows that if you have a previous injury, you have a higher risk of developing a new one. And we say that to them and explain them that there is evidence on this. The second one was in running volume. So how much you should run. You should increase progressively. Try not to avoid spikes on running load. The third one was add warm-up and cooling down exercises. The fourth, implementing general conditional training. Then listen to your body. So if you feel that something's wrong, just seek for help. And shoes for trail running. So trail running is a specific kind of running that you need special shoes for it, and some people just start practicing without these specific shoes, so we give advice on this. But these categories, the advice we give them was a little bit different between this stratum. So if there is general advice, we just give them a more informative information material. If they were classified as non-substantial injury or substantial injury, we intensify this strategy, intensify this information to say them, well, now this topic, for example, is really important. In Brazil, The only similarity that I see with the Running 3 and the Trail 6 is that we are using an online system, and it's based on feedback and information. But the information we gave to them is completely different. First, because they are not trail runners. So, for example, it doesn't make sense to talk about shoes anymore for the Brazilian population. So we are not targeting these kind of things. On the other hand, it's very important to target training load, because you see that in Brazil, they are concerned about this. The runners said this during the meetings. So we give them advice with videos, for example. That was a strategy not used in the Trail 6. And actually in the Trail 6 in the Netherlands, I felt that if you could use an intervention more close to the runners, it could be more effective. But we didn't use videos or anything like that. So in the Running 3 strategy, we tried to come up with these new strategies to interact more with the runners.
Okay, thank you. And I just want to, yeah, there's another question.
Yeah.
What was the reason in the Netherlands to focus on only trail runners?
Yeah, well,
what was the reason?
Yeah.
I just repeat the question. And what was the reason for following the trail runners and not recreational runners?
Yeah, that's a very nice story, actually. So I started my PhD with a research project that was based on cohort studies. And our main focus was comparing the running-related injury risk through these groups. And one group was trail runner, because at the time, they were like a boom in the Netherlands. All runners were thinking about doing trail running. And there was no evidence about trail running back then. So we started to study them in a cohort study. After the cohort study finished, so I had like 1 year only to write my thesis and be very, very calm with time to defend my thesis. But the trail runners itself came to us and said, well, now that you have done the cohort and you know our risk factors, and etc., could you do something for helping us to prevent injuries? And I thought this very nice, because, well, it was not the researcher that was trying to push them an intervention, but they were asking us what we could do. And I could not say no for that. And I said, well, yeah, let's see if we can put together a project. Then we put together this Trail 6 project that was conducted in 6 months. And this is why it was in 6 months. I have only 6 months to run the study and then defend my thesis. But as we had short periods of time, I thought that maybe here in Brazil I could increase a little bit this time with a longer process, trying to improve this. Yeah. So I answered your question? Yeah? Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe any other question with regards? I think it's interesting. Did you think about who provides the program and how? I think you did, because of course you decided then to go online because of the, want to reach more people. Are there any studies or evidence that it makes any difference if it's a coach, a healthcare provider, or online, who provides the information about how to avoid injuries or how to improve in terms of running?
Yeah, there is no evidence in running. But if you look at the literature, it seems that if you have a deliver with health professionals, for example, and etc., I think it's more likely that the runners, for example, could take it. But the idea of these programs is trying to prevent overall injuries. So it's not like we want to individualize much the strategy. It's we think about a first line, a population-based and first lane preventive strategy. So then, if they think they need more specific for some specific injuries, then probably they should seek for a health professional. But to get there, we need first these first lane studies about overall injuries. At least this is what I feel about the field, the research that has been done.
All right, and then of course the question is always like, what has been shown who can prevent injuries? Is there any hard facts, and what do the majority of the studies say? Is there any magic bullet or
Yeah, unfortunately, there is no magic bullet. But the scenario today is better than in 2011, the time of that Cochrane systematic review. So basically, what the Cochrane systematic review said is we don't have evidence of things that could prevent running-related injuries. But then after that, some trials were published. For example, the Trail 6 were published, and the Trail 6 showed that if you deliver some online intervention with basic information, you could prevent running injuries. And I think this could be effective because most of the information that the runners find themselves in the internet, for example, they are not actually evidence-based. They are essentially wrong. So if you correct this, maybe you are already helping. And another line that is raising right now is that there is one study of I don't remember the country or the research group that have published this, but they have published a trial comparing a group of people that run with no feedback, and one group of people run with visual feedback of the graph created in the biomechanics analysis. And the feedback they did is like, you should run softly, not like hearing the voice of your feet on the ground. And it was effective to prevent running injuries. But it's one study, so it's not actually conclusive. But I think we have two lines now. We have one line that's more in a biomechanical field, which says that, well, maybe feedback on some biomechanical markers could help. And in the epidemiological field, which is my field, it's something like if you build like a general strategy, deliver online with information, trying to avoid mistakes in practice, you may help as well.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm wondering about the strike pattern.
There is a question about the stride pattern. Does it matter in terms of risk? Running-related injuries. Is there any evidence or any study which looked at the strike pattern?
Yeah, there is no definite study, but there are some evidence there. So in the first, when this idea of strike. So for those who don't know, foot strike pattern would be if you there are basically two. If you run like touching the floor first with your heel.
Okay.
If you touch the floor first with the middle of your foot, or if you touch the floor first with a little bit of the front of the foot. And the idea behind is that most of runners are running with the heel pattern, and probably this is because of the shoes that you are using. There is an evolutionary rationale behind it, and probably this is getting people injured. So we should like run with a more natural way, and this natural way would be touching the floor more with the middle of the foot. And the initial studies have raised this question, but longitudinal studies shown that if you change your foot strike pattern, you change your injury pattern. You are not actually preventing injuries, but you are switching the place of the injury, for example. So if you are a heel strike pattern runner, you may have more injuries in the knee or in the hip. But if you change that for a more foot strike pattern, you probably will get more injuries in the foot or in the leg or in the lower leg. But there is no trial on it. Okay, so I think there's no definite answer. But in practice, what we see, at least in Brazil, I don't know if here is the same, but a lot of people say, you should change your foot strike pattern, and you see people after that with complaints because of this change. And this is addressed in the Running 3 program. It was not addressed in the Trail 6, but it is addressed in the Running 3 program, saying that if you are okay with your way of running, don't change it. I mean, there is no rationale, there's no reason for change the foot strike pattern in that scenario. But the program also says if you have symptoms of some specific places, then you should look or seek for a health professional, because then this could make sense. But in the sense of primary prevention, I would say that it's too early to say that, you should change. So if the runner is comfortable with his or her way of running, I would say don't change it.
All right. Thank you very much. I think we are near to close, and I would like to thank you very much, Luiz, and everybody in the audience, the technicians, and everybody who made this possible, and that we can keep going with the live stream. So we have a next date and the next appointment in January 2020, the January 29, that's for sure. We may have a next guest lecture also earlier, but the topic will be then in general will be about pain medication in musculoskeletal disorders, because we're seeing a lot of trials that show no effect, most of the pain medication. And so we will ask Maria Wertli from the Inselspital, which is a social professor, whether it's worth to take any medications for musculoskeletal pain. She will have her talk then. But yeah, thank you everybody. I wish you a good evening and bon appetit for our friends in Brazil. They are, I think it's lunchtime, so they might be very hungry, or they had their lunch. We're ready for dinner. Thank you, Luiz, for coming.
Yeah, thank you.
And
thank you.
have a good evening, everybody.